In this video, I'm going to show you how to integrate Clerk Authentication into a React and Django app. So the React side is pretty easy, but the Django side requires a little bit of work, and I'm going to show you how you can get started with that in Django. So I'm going to build something that you can build off of depending on your needs, but the idea should be the same for any project. So let's get into building this example of using Clerk with a React and Django app. Okay, so to begin, let me show you what I have here. I have this React app set up to where if I hit this fetch videos button, it will fetch all the videos in my database. So right now it's just fetching all the videos, but later when I integrate Clerk in everything, it will fetch the videos for the logged in user. So I only have 4 videos here, and for those videos I have a channel, and I just did that so I can reassign the videos to another user later when I create another user. But right now I just have my admin user, so that's why I have that set up as it is. For the app itself, for the code, we go into the front end here. I'll show you how simple it is. So I have this fetch videos function, which just calls an API endpoint for getting all the videos. And then it sets the state for those videos. And then in the return here, I'm just creating some list items. And I have this button that will fetch the videos. So the front end is really simple. And then the back end, going here to views in my app, if I can find it, I have this video list view. This was made with Django REST framework. It's just getting all the videos. Like I said, later it will get all the videos for the logged in user, but because I don't have a concept of the logged in user from the front end app yet, it's just getting all the videos. So the purpose of this video is to show you how to make it to where I can have users from Clerk interact with my Django side, the API, to get the users that belong to that particular user. So the first thing I want to do before going any further with the code is I want to go over to Clerk and just create a user. So right now I don't have any users in my account. So I'll just go to users here and I'll create a user. And I'll say the email is going to be anthony@gmail.com. And then I'm just going to put in a really basic password and ignore the password policies because this password won't pass. It's basically just password 1. Okay, so we have the account anthony@gmail.com. So when I have everything set up for Clerk, I'll be able to log in with this user. So now let me go back over to the code. And the first thing I want to do is work on the front end. So I have 2 terminals open, one for the back end, one for the front end here. I'll start with the front end stuff. So let me close the back end folder and this file. And I'll do everything on the front end first, and then we'll move over to the back end to integrate everything there. So what I want to do first is I want to get Clerk working on the front end, which I can do because Clerk is very easy to integrate with any front end. So what I'll do is I'll install Clerk with npm install, and then that's going to be at Clerk and Clerk React for the library location. So let me just run that. So this should only take a second. And then what I want to do is inside of my front end directory, I want to create a .env file, because this is going to hold my Clerk secret key. So I need to start with Vite. I'm using Vite for everything. I created my React app with Vite. So Vite starts the name of the environment variable, and then the actual environment variable name is Clerk publishable key. And then that's going to be equal to the key that I have for my account. So you would just go to your account and find your key through configure, and you would paste it into here. Okay, so I pasted in my key and I closed the env file. So now I want to set up Clerk to work. So for this, I'll go to main.jsx. And obviously your React project structure might be slightly different, but you'll be able to find a similar place to put this code. So here in my main.jsx, what I want to do is I want to create a constant called publishable key. So publishable key. And the idea is I'm just going to grab the environment variable that I just created. So to do that, I can do import.meta.env and then vite underscore clerk publishable key. So the same one that I just created inside of the .env file. And then this key needs to be set for everything to work. So what I can do is I can just throw an error if this key doesn't exist. So I can have an if here. I can say if not publishable key. So publishable key. If it doesn't exist, then I want to throw an error. So throw new and then error. And I'll just say add your Clerk publishable key to the .env file. So that's a full description of the error. And now what I want to do is I want to bring in the Clerk provider. So I'll do import, and then I want to bring in just the Clerk provider from the Clerk React library. So Clerk provider, and I want to bring that in from the library that I install. So at Clerk, and then Clerk React. And then what I can do is I can just wrap that around the app here. So inside of strict mode, I'll do Clerk provider, and then I need to pass the key. So that's going to be publishable key equals, and then this publishable key that I have here as a constant, right? And then the closing tag for the Clerk provider is just going to go after app, and then I'll indent app. So that should be all I need for main.jsx. So now let me go to app.jsx, which has my main component here for the app. And I want to start by importing some stuff from Clerk. So I'm going to import signed in. So this is a component signed in along with signed out, sign in button, and user button. So these are 4 components that Clerk gives you to use in your React app. And it makes it really easy to get up and running with their authentication. So using these components is really easy. So signed out is the component I want to start with. So the idea is signed out will wrap anything that the user can see when they're signed out, so when they're not signed in. So let me go ahead and add that component. And then anything in between these 2 tags, they can see when they're signed out. So for this example, I want to show the sign in button. So let me go ahead and put that there. And then for the signed in stuff, similar idea, code that they will see only when they are signed in. So I want to put the rest of the code that I have here. So I'll just wrap my H1 and my UL. So let me go ahead and save that. And then I should be able to test it. So let me start up my app, go back to the home page. And when I load it, I see a sign in button. I no longer see the YouTube videos and the fetch button. So I can go ahead and hit the sign in button, and it will redirect me to Clerk to sign in. So I'll just put anthony@gmail.com. Continue, and then my password. So password 1, you can see what it looks like here. This is just a basic password. And because it's telling me that my password has been part of a breach because it's so simple, I'll go ahead and reset it. Since this isn't my real email address, I'll go into the Clerk dashboard and reset the password here. So I'll go down here to password, I'll click change password, and I'll put in something more complicated. So password 1, and then my name at the end. Okay, change password. So this one should be okay. So now let me go back and I'll sign in again. So this will be password 1 and then Anthony at the end, and then hit continue. Okay, so that password is fine. And now we see that YouTube videos and fetch videos shows up. So I can still hit fetch videos and it will send the requests. So now let me show you something about the fetch videos. So I'll go to the network tab here and hit fetch videos again. And if I go inside of the requests for the videos, if I look at the headers for the requests, so no authentication information. So we're going to come back here once we add that. So let's go back over to the code. And what I want to do is I want to send a token to my backend that basically represents the user. So to do that, it's really easy in Clerk. So another thing I need to import is called useAuth. And then I'll use this hook to get something that I can use to get the token. So what I can do here is I can do const, and then I just want get token out of useAuth. So useAuth here, it can return other things, but I just want get token. And then the idea here is I will call this get token when fetch videos is called. So what I can do here is I can do const token equals await get token. So it's going to grab the user's token for me. And then I can take that token and I can pass it along with the fetch. So in the fetch, I'll add some options here. And what I want to do for the options is I want to add headers. And then the header that I want to add is the authorization header. And the value of the authorization header needs to be bearer and then the token itself. So to add the token in here, I'll just do $token. And then that will send the token along with the request. So let's go ahead and take a look at it now. Let me go back to the app. Let me clear this out and hit fetch videos again. And if we look at the headers now, we see we have authorization here, we see bearer, and then we have this long token. So this token is given to me by Clerk, and I'll be able to use this token on the back end to associate the user who is logged in through Clerk with an account in my Django app. So now with the front end part of it done, let's go over to the back end. So let me close out this. I shouldn't have to do anything else with the front end because it's going to just send the token. Now it's up to me to change the back end to get everything to work. So let me open the backend folder. And then what I'll do is I'll do UV add and then Clerk Backend API. So this will install the Python SDK. And now what I want to do is I want to go over to my settings. So project and then settings. And I want to add in the Clerk API secret key. So I'm going to need this. I'll fill it in a little bit later when it comes time for me to actually use things, but I'm going to have the secret key here, and I'll come back to the settings.py to create another setting that I'll need in a second for the Django REST framework. But now that we have the secret key in there, let me go over to the app. And what I want to do is I want to create an authentication backend. So the idea is that Django allows you to authenticate a user in many different ways depending on your circumstances. So Django has some built-in backends. So for example, the username and password backend that you use to log into the admin dashboard. That's one way of authenticating a user, but you can use other ones that you can just bring in from other libraries, or you can create your own. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my own to show you how it works and to get Clerk to work with this. So I'm going to create a file called backends.py. So this represents my auth backends, and I'm going to import a few things here. So I have the imports already on my clipboard, so I'll just paste them in here. And the idea is I need to import some stuff from the Clerk backend to authenticate a request. So the idea is the user's token will reach this authentication request function in some way, and then Clerk will determine if that token is valid. If it is, then it will return the user's information for me. I'll need the settings to get the secret key that I just set up. I'll need get user model to use the user model. Let me just go ahead and set that up now. So user equals get user model. Okay, because I'm dealing with users. And then from REST framework, I'll need authentication. So I'm setting up something to work with a Django REST framework. So if I were doing this with just pure Django, Django has a base backend that you can import and extend. But because I'm using Django REST framework, I want to use the base backend for the Django REST framework. So it works with my API because I'm not really concerned with it working with my app through the browser. This should work through the API. So now what I want to do is I want to create this backend. I'm going to call this Clerk Authentication. And it's going to inherit from the base authentication class from the Django REST framework. So we want authentication here, dot base authentication. So authentication, just making sure I'm spelling that correctly. And then inside of this backend, you need to define a method called authenticate. So this will be called automatically by Django. So authenticate. And it takes in two arguments. It takes in self and requests. Okay, so the idea here is at this point, you're going to have request information coming in. So, you have the headers that are available, which we need, and any other information associated with the request. But in our case, we just care about the headers because that's where we have the authorization information. So what I'll do is first is I'll check to make sure that that authorization header is in there. So I'll say if authorization not in requests.headers, return none. So the idea with these authentication backends is you want to return none if the user isn't even attempting to authenticate in this way. The reason why you do that is because Django can then move on to the next form of authentication because you can have multiple in your app. You don't want to raise an error if they're not attempting to use a particular type of authentication because that means they won't be able to authenticate in any other ways. So make sure you return none if they're not attempting to, or if there's some kind of error with the authentication that has nothing to do with the user being authorized or not. So just keep that in mind. So if there is no authorization, we're just saying that they're not attempting this. So we return none. And then what I want to do is I want to set up this try except because this part can fail depending on what's going on. So what I want to do here is I'll say if except equals exception as E. I know it's a little weird to write the exception block first, but the reason why is because the exception itself doesn't really matter. I just want to log it in some way. So for our purposes, I'll just print it. But in a real app, you can log it. And then I want to return none. So this exception just means that our authentication system messed up in some way. So we can't really say if the user has authenticated or not because something is going wrong on our side. So we'll just return none so Django can try the other authentication backends that are out there. All right, so now let's go back into the try. And what I want to do is I want to authenticate this request through Clerk. So what I can do is I can create this variable called request state, and then I'll use this authenticate request function that I imported before. And what I want to pass to this is the request itself. So the nice thing about this function is I can just pass the entire request and then it will grab the token for me. And then I want to pass in some options. So authenticate request options. And the only thing I need to pass in here is the secret key. So this is the secret key for my account. So Clerk knows which account to look at. And this is going to be the Clerk API secret key that I created in settings.py. So let me open that up again. This secret key is just here. So this should be settings, not setting, but I'm getting the secret key from my settings. So Clerk knows which account this is for. So now after this performs the authentication, and then I can check to see if the user signed in. So I can say if not request state, so request underscore state is signed in. So Clerk will populate this. So if this is not true, meaning they're not signed in, I just want to print out a message. So I'll say authentication failed. Now, the reason why this authentication fails can be for a couple of reasons. It can be because there's something wrong with the way you have it set up, so it's your problem, or it can be something with the token that the user passed in, so it can be a user problem. Because it can be either one, you can look at the individual errors, but to save time, I'm just going to take all the errors as being the same, or all the reasons why the authentication didn't work as the same. So I'm going to just print out the message in my logging. So request state.message. This message will only be available if the user isn't logged in. So I'm going to print out that message and then I'm going to return none. So if you wanted to extend this further, you can go into the Clerk SDK and look up all of the different reasons why authentication can fail. And then for some, you can raise an error, and for others, you can return none. But like I said, I don't want to do that in this video because that would take a while to do for each case. So for all the cases, I'm just going to return none. And that means Django can try the next backend authentication method. Okay, so if we make it past that, that means the user is logged in. So what I want to do once the user is logged in is I want to grab the user's information so I can both get their account on the Django side and fill in their email address if their account doesn't already exist. So what I'll do now is I'll use with Clerk, and then I'll pass in my auth information. So bearer underscore auth, and this is going to be equal to the secret key here. So settings dot Clerk API secret key, and I'll do ask Clerk so I can use that inside of the block. And what I want to do here is I want to get the user data. So I'll say clerk.users.get, and then user ID is going to be equal to request state dot payload and then sub. So this request state is going to be populated with payload, and payload is going to have sub, which represents the user ID on the Clerk side. And then Clerk will return this user data for the user. So this will have all the information about the user. And what I want to get about this user is their primary email address. So they can have multiple email addresses, but I want the primary one. So let me create a variable for that. I'll say primary email address ID equals user data. So user underscore data dot primary, if I can spell this. So primary email address ID. Okay, so there we go. So I'm getting the primary email address ID. And then what I want to do is I want to get the email associated with that. So I want the specific email associated with the primary email ID. So what I'll do is I will create a generator. So I'll start with next, and I'll show you how this works in a second. So I'm going to create a generator with these parentheses, and then I'll do email for email in user data dot email addresses. So email underscore addresses. So this is going to be a list of email address IDs basically that the user has, along with the other email address information. And I'll say if email.id is equal to the primary email address ID. Okay. So if there's a match, it's going to return the email in the generator. I'm expecting just one match, so I want the first one, so that's where I'm using next. If it gives me a list of 4 things, I'll use next just once. It will give me the first one, but because I'm expecting one, it's just going to give me one. And then if it doesn't find it, then I want to default to none. So if this generator comes up empty, then it's just going to return none here instead of throwing an error because the generator is empty. So none is the next value in the case that it doesn't find an email. Okay, so now that I have this email, the last thing I want to do is I want to either create a new user or I want to get the user that is associated with that account. So what I'll do here is I'll do user underscore because I'm going to do user objects get or create. So I'm using the underscore here because I don't care about the Boolean that says if it's create or not. I just want to get or create. And then I want to search on the username. So username is equal, and it's going to be this value here. So the sub, so this is the clerk ID. And then I want to have defaults here in case it creates a new user. So the email is going to be this email address. Okay, so it's going to give me the user back either way. So if it's an existing user, it's going to query for that user and give it to me. If that user doesn't exist, it's going to create the user for me and return it. And the reason why you do a create here is because there's a disconnect between your Django app and Clerk. So whenever somebody creates an account on Clerk, Django needs to be synced with that. So there are webhooks on Clerk that you can use, but I find that it's a little bit easier just to create the user the first time you see them, and then you can populate the rest of the user information if you like with the webhook, even though I'm using the email address here. So you can also do the email address in the webhook, but here I'm adding it. So it's completely up to you. And then that should be it for getting the user. So the last thing this backend needs to do is it needs to return that user. So it needs to return a tuple with the user object and none. Okay, so this is what Django's expecting for the backend. So this user represents the user account, and then it will return none if the authentication doesn't work for whatever reason. So this should be enough for the backend. So let me go over to settings, and I want to add in another setting value. So that setting value is going to be REST underscore framework because I don't have any REST framework set up yet in my settings. And I want to set the default authentication classes. So classes here, and I only have one. And I just want to grab that from my app.backends.clerk authentication. Okay. So just grabbing that. And then that should be enough. So let me go ahead and start up my Django app just to make sure there are no errors anywhere because that was a lot of typing. So run server, and let's see if there are any errors. And it looks like everything worked. So now what I want to do is I want to go over to views, and I want to make this list view now require that the user be authenticated to view it. So what I can do inside of the class, I can say permission underscore classes equals, and then in here I'll have is authenticated, which I imported already. And then what happens is when you have this is authenticated, that means the request object is always going to have a user associated with it. So what I can do is I can change this query from video.objects.all to video.objects.filter, and then channel owner is going to be equal to request.user. So it's going to get all the videos for the channel that belongs to the current user. So let's see, this should be enough. So last thing I need to do is I'll add in my secret key. Okay, my secret key has been added. So let me go over to the app and refresh the page. And I'll hit fetch videos. So I hit fetch videos. And we see I get an error. So I get a 403 error. And I have this error is signed up. So I think I was just thinking of sign up when it should be signed in. So let me go over to where that is. So this should be is signed in, not is signed up. So let me go ahead and save that. And then I can go back over to my app and reload the page and then fetch videos again. Okay, so this time I got a 200, but we see there are no videos returned. So if I look at the response here, the raw version, we get an empty list. So that means there are no videos associated with this user. So first, let me go to the admin dashboard and refresh, and we see I have a new user. So this user represents the same user on Clerk. So we see it ends in BJ1. If we go here and look at the ID, it ends in BJ1. And if I go to the dashboard again and go to channels, what I'll do is I'll change the ownership of the pretty printed channel from Anthony to this user that I just created. I'll hit save. And now all the videos should belong to that user. So let me hit fetch videos here. And now we see all the videos show up again. And that shows us that the videos are now associated with that account. So the Clerk information is being passed over to my backend properly, that token, and then I'm authenticating again on the backend. And then with that authentication information, I'm getting the user object associated with it. And then I can query to get all the videos that belong to that particular user. So as you can see, everything that I've done in this video is pretty straightforward. And like I said, the reason why I wanted to make this video is because I think Clerk is a really good library on the front end, and I didn't see any resources on how to get it to work with Django. So this is one approach that you can take to get Clerk working with your Django backends. And of course, as you saw in this video, I used the Django REST framework. So if you want to learn more about the Django REST framework, watch this video next.